The Chosen Season 3 is officially out for everybody to watch, not just in theaters, but really open for everybody. But today I want to walk through some of the clips that we see in episode 1 and specifically talk about the storyline of Matthew, who is the through line of this entire episode. Just like we saw in Season 2, episode 1, where John was kind of that through line, Matthew plays that role here in the first episode of Season 3. And of course, you can check out this new episode and all the new episodes on the Angel Studios app like you always have been able to over the last few years. You can watch it on your phone, or you can cast it to your TV or any major streaming device. One thing that most people love is that you can watch it for free, of course, on the Angel Studios app, and it's always going to be free there no matter what. And if you want to help future people watch the episodes for free, then you can help pay it forward as well, so that The Chosen can continue to make what they need to. And then obviously, other than The Chosen, they have many other shows on the Angel Studios app as well. You guys know that one that I'm really excited about is called Testament. This is an amazing modern day retelling of the book of Acts that they're actually preparing to raise more and more funds for right now, so that they can get into production and start making this amazing show. I'm really excited for that one in particular, but there are many other shows from comedy and family shows and kids shows, a ton of different stuff on the Angel Studios app. So download the app today if you want to check out these episodes of The Chosen Season 3 and everything that's coming out over the next few months. Of course, the link to download the app is down in the top pinned comment and the description down below. And thank you so much to Angel Studios for sponsoring this video. As I talk about all the time, the writing in The Chosen is impeccable. It's one of the reasons why the show is so successful, because, well, they do an amazing job of logically explaining how these characters would have felt, and they do it in a way that is really genius. And so Matthew is no different in this episode here. They begin by showing us who he was, and then they transition us into who he's going to become later on. And there's a lot of different things that play into this, a lot of little hidden details within the writing that I love in this episode, including an overall theme of Matthew really feeling rejected by everybody. It's pretty intense, but it's an amazing storyline throughout all of it. So this episode actually starts 2 years before the main storyline begins in Season 1. We know that the majority of what we've seen is in 26 AD, other than the flash forwards and flashbacks, but here we see 24 AD when Matthew has just started his tax collecting journey. This is interesting to me because I was under the impression that Matthew had been a tax collector for far more than just a few years, but that seems to not be the case, since this is the beginning-ish of his journey, as he's his parents' tax collector here. This does make me wonder how old Matthew actually is, since we don't really know any of the disciples' ages other than Simon the Zealot, who says he's almost 40 now. But we see as a Roman soldier knocks on the door of a Jewish residence that happens to be Matthew's father's house, Alphaeus. And of course, his wife Elisheva and him are there, and he is about to be arrested because he hasn't paid his taxes and he doesn't have the money ready to go. He's asked for several extensions, and yet the guard is not willing to give it to him until Matthew speaks up and stops the altercation. It turns out that Matthew was actually the one to send this guard to his father's house. And this obviously is a big deal. Not only has Matthew brought disgrace on their family for being a tax collector in the first place, but now he's his father's publicanus, which means that he is the one that's collecting taxes from his own family.
The Romans never forced you into it. You chose to apply. You chose to betray.
You chose a secure future.
You are called to trust in Adonai with all your heart and not lean on your own
I have trusted.
understanding.
Can you name one thing Adonai has done for our people?
During this conversation, we see as Matthew's father, Alphaeus, is trying to talk with Matthew and have this discussion, telling him what he's doing is wrong and talking about Adonai, but even Matthew denies that Adonai is helpful in the situation. It's pretty crazy to see where he's at. He's completely against the faith entirely, and he's focused on what he needs to do for Rome. This is a rough conversation between the two of them, because it's like Matthew is spitting in the face of his parents and just telling them they have to deal with this.
You owe your government 2 months of tribute.
I will bring in a payment by the end of the week.
You've missed 2 payments. I was hoping Lucius could convince you, but I will no longer protect you.
I don't want your protection.
Then you have 24 hours, Abba.
Don't call me Abba.
Face, please.
What?
Ellie, cover the windows. Put on your veil. We will sit Shiva for 7 days. I have no son.
Alphaeus says that he will get the payment to Matthew by the end of the week, but then things get a little bit more heated. Matthew says that he actually owes 2 payments, not just the one. And then Matthew has the audacity to say that he will no longer protect his father. So instead of having till the rest of the week to do these payments, now he's giving him only 24 hours. And then we see as the conversation ends with Alphaeus basically disowning Matthew entirely, and in a way that is actually crazy. He tells him not to call him Abba anymore, and then he tells his wife Elisheva to go back inside, to cover the windows, and to put on her veil, because they were going to sit Shiva for 7 days. Now, what does this mean? Shiva is basically a funeral. We saw this at one other point in The Chosen in season 2, episode 1, as we see the Shiva for Big James, as he is the first martyred out of the disciples.
I need to get their memories.
You need to mourn Big James.
But here, they're basically saying that Matthew is dead to them, and that they no longer have a son. We see the confusion and the pain and the sorrow on Matthew's face as he's just trying to figure out this situation in his mind. And then in one of my favorite moments from episode 1, we see this match cut back to AD 26 as he's then at the Sermon on the Mount listening to Jesus' words pertaining to this issue specifically. The cinematography and writing here is amazing, as obviously we're jumping from Matthew's mind and what he's thinking back to the present and hearing Jesus' words as he's kind of walking through all of this. It's amazing to see how Matthew is putting everything together for himself. We see a quick conversation with Mary and Matthew, where Matthew kind of explains that Jesus is saying the same words that he had him write down, but the way that he's saying it is so much more impactful, and specifically for Matthew. And Matthew's not the only one that was impacted by the sermon. We've done a whole video talking about how the other disciples were actually impacted heavily by the sermon as well. And then after the Sermon on the Mount is over, we actually see this amazing scene between Jesus and Matthew as he comes to approach him to get more clarification about certain parts of the sermon or things that Jesus added that he didn't have Matthew write down earlier, and to get more understanding of the things that impacted Matthew specifically. We actually get a really cool hidden moment here from Matthew as he talks to Jesus about the cultural and historical context of Jesus' teachings. Now, there are some things that he said during the sermon that Matthew didn't write down originally that Jesus had added as he's going through the sermon. And here he specifically says that he recognized some of these teachings as something that Hillel would have said as well.
I was able to write down many of the new things you said, but not all of them.
That's fine. We'll say them again and we can discuss them then.
I recognize some of them from my studies of the teachings of Rabbi Hillel.
It's very good, Matthew.
When you said to be reconciled to your brother, can you elaborate on
Matthew.
it?
Now, we know from our previous research and other videos from season 2, we have 2 schools of thought within the Jewish historical context. And that would be Shammai, who is the more rigid and harsh teacher, and then we have Hillel, who is the more gentle and soft teacher. Now, many scholars actually believe that Jesus would have used some of Hillel's teachings or even learned from him during his time on earth. Crazy to think about, but without actually kind of dedicating to that, The Chosen kind of points to that a little bit by using Matthew in this line.
I recognize some of them from my studies of the teachings of Rabbi Hillel.
And then after this small conversation, we actually see Jesus almost reject Matthew. Now, I wouldn't say this is an outright rejection, but it's definitely like a pushing away of Matthew. And I think it's for a very specific reason. The writing within The Chosen obviously is very intentional. And so from minute 1 of this episode, Matthew is being rejected by everybody. So as he's kind of going through, there's not a moment where he feels accepted at all. Now, obviously in this circumstance, Jesus is not intentionally pushing Matthew away and just telling him, no, you're annoying, go away from me, I'm rejecting you. That's not exactly what's happening, but we do see in the writing that Jesus is not intentionally taking on this conversation and sitting down with Matthew. He's asking him to go do something else instead of spending time with him at this very moment. This, I think, is extremely intentional by the writers, and we're going to see more of this in just a second. Then, as we continue throughout the episode, we see as everybody is kind of finding their homes in Capernaum and the surrounding area. Obviously, not everybody lives in Capernaum, so there's different houses that are being founded, like Mary's house, or Simon's house, or even Andrew's house that we haven't really seen yet in any of the episodes. But we don't know where Matthew is going to stay. And so the next scene that we get is actually him with Mary kind of discussing this a little bit because he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. He's confused and he wants to go to someone that he trusts. Now, I assume that Matthew didn't go to any of the other disciples because, well, maybe he doesn't have a great relationship with them yet. Even though I would have thought maybe he would talk to Philip and maybe try to stay at Andrew's house. I'm not quite sure why we didn't see any of that happen. But it looks like there's a couple of different things that could be happening here. Mary is obviously worried about him, but she can't obviously accept him into her house. She's a female, there's females living in the house, it just wouldn't work, right? but he needs to find somewhere to stay. And she actually says,
You have a home in one of the most beautiful neighborhoods.
I gave it away.
To whom?
My parents.
which is very true. He does own the biggest and best house basically in the town, but he can't stay there because he gave the key to his parents. And of course, that relationship is just tarnished. Now, he also says that he may make camp because he's proficient in that now.
I think perhaps I'll make camp. I know how to do it now.
But I wasn't exactly sure if this meant that he actually did make camp or if there was just a time period where he was wondering if he should do that. But actually, we got some clarification from The Chosen on our live video that we did in our discussion from episode 1, and they actually confirmed that Matthew did go and make camp this night, which means that there's actually a day in between this section of the episode and the next section, giving Andrew a little bit more time to travel in between Machaerus and Capernaum, even though I still don't think he would have enough time to do so. But again, we can infer here through the writing of the episode that Matthew is rejected again. Not necessarily by Mary, but he feels as if he's rejected by everybody else in the group. Otherwise, why wouldn't he go ask them for a place to stay instead of having to go camp out in the wilderness? That's not something that you would want to do, and especially Matthew would not want to do that. So we can see how the writing is just perfect in this episode. Everybody seems to be rejecting Matthew in their own ways, right? Jesus isn't outright rejecting him, but in a way he is, because he's not continuing this conversation and he's not having the full conversation that Matthew wants to have.
Father, can you elaborate on
Matthew, perhaps we can talk about this some other time. Very hungry, and I would love to chat with our new friend about it.
And then we see Mary obviously can't accept him into her home, and the rest of the disciples are obviously in some way rejecting him as well. Even if it's just in Matthew's mind, that's the case here. But then finally, at the end of the episode, after everything is done, we see as Matthew knocks on his parents' door, and we hear one word from his father that turns everything around. As Alphaeus opens the door, Matthew looks at him and says, Alphaeus. And then Alphaeus looks back, and instead of saying Matthew or tax collector or traitor, he says, son.
Alphaeus.
Son.
This changes everything for Matthew. Throughout the entire episode, bookmarked on both ends, he is rejected by everybody. He doesn't have a place to stay. He's alone. Nobody is fully accepting him for who he is or where he is. But then finally, at the very end of the episode, we see as his own father, who had rejected him before, who didn't want anything to do with him before, finally accepts him. Such great writing. Matthew's story is one that so many people resonate with, and I'm so excited to see the future of what this means for Matthew overall. And don't miss our live streams every single Sunday evening. Right after the episode's release, we're going to be doing a discussion stream on our channel just to make sure we can get all the details of exactly what's happening with The Chosen this season. Thank you so much to our Patreon family who keep this channel running, and if you want to join them, it would be amazing. We have some extra content and extra things over there for you guys to check out. Anyway, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.